None of my girlfriends loved it. And I don't understand it because of all the places I've lived, it was my favorite. There was no crime. The kids could roam all over the neighborhood. The only thing you really had to watch out for was the moose.
Breaking news tonight.
Several leads in their investigation of the brutal murder.
Committed a series of murders of young women and girls. The decomposed body of partially decomposed,
whose body was found Christmas. The brutal murder of an Anchorage
in
woman.
the city of Fairbanks, Alaska. Thomas Richard Bundy, Robert Hansen.
Michael Silka.
Louis D. Hastings. The murder series began on August 29, 1979. Was found Fairbanks resident Minnesota.
Alaska is no stranger to violent
The deceased told Bloomberg he saw her talking to a stranger sitting in a blue car and wearing an Air Force uniform.
During the investigation, the police for the first time suggested that a serial killer from among the military personnel was operating in the territory.
And now, the story of phone calls, interviews, case files, and Josh and Amanda spilling it all. I'm Amanda Fallon, and this is the Shirley You Can't Be Serious behind the scenes. Okay, so episode 4 starts out with your amazing montage. Dive into the contrast between Shirley and what was actually going on around her.
Yeah, I think it's the most blatant, right? Our most blatant nod into just highlighting how Shirley obviously isn't operating in the same reality as her environment. And whether that's deliberate, whether that's her being a little bit innocent or oblivious, or a little bit of both, really wanted to push. I think this was the few months where we were putting together episode 4, and it might have been affected by me just looking at just mountains of data about Alaska at the time. We had looked at just statistics about missing persons and violent crimes and where Alaska is in comparison to the rest of the country and the world. And we had found a statistic, I think. What's number 2? Is it Florida? I think it was Alaska and then Florida, right? And
for disappearances?
Disappearances, yeah. I think
I'd have to look it up.
I think the number in Alaska was in the tens of thousands, and in Florida it was like 1,200 or something like that in a specific year that we looked at. And then when we looked at the data, it's really hard to see the data from 1965 to 1985 because a lot of things haven't been digitized. There's a lot of studies that were done that were somewhat inconclusive because of the nature of people coming in and out. Like there was a lot of transient populations, and but one of the estimates that we got the closest to was in those 20 years that we looked at, there was about 40,000 violent crimes of a sexual nature. And so I think that's why we wanted to start off with this episode in this juxtaposition of Shirley saying, "Oh, I loved Alaska. None of my girlfriends liked Alaska. There were 10 guys to every girl, and it was great. And I felt totally safe. There was no crime. You know, the only thing I was afraid of were the moose." And so I thought, what a fun scene change to go from that very blissful statement to the montage of some of the collections of stories that we found at that time that were pretty riveting, right? Those are actual stories in that montage of Michael Silka and Thomas Bundy, Robert Hansen. That's when we found the McCarthy stories of Hastings. And it was even, you know, as we started reading the news reports and the stories and the encyclopedia pages and things, it was just, for me, and maybe this was a bias, right? Like this was a confirmation bias because we were looking for behaviors around the military bases at the time. Obviously, there was a lot of the pipeline guys and a lot of the people that were doing things, but seeing reports that said, numerous eyewitnesses said that during the last, one of them that really stopped me dead in my tracks is like the victim was seen speaking to a man in an Air Force uniform. And so it was a very present danger that Shirley was just not addressing for whatever reason.
Was she not addressing it, or was she living it during the time it was living? So Shirley was there, and I don't think she watched the news, so she wouldn't have been getting all of the news updates. But yeah. When you look back in like your own life, do you notice the stuff that's going on at the moment that it's happening? Like Robert Hansen was active from 1971 to 1983. Shirley moved to Alaska in 1972.
Yeah.
And then met Stephen Skaggs in 1982. So Shirley was living during the time period, you know. But Robert Hansen wasn't arrested until 83.
Yeah.
Was it 83? Yeah. Yes, 1983, Robert Hansen was arrested. So it's one of those things where, like, you look back, kind of like with Eddie, right? Where we ask him the question, like, was there writing on the wall with Stephen Skaggs? And then he's like, oh, yeah, now I can see, like, looking back in hindsight, there was all the animal trophies. But when you're living in the moment, like, we have to remember, Shirley lived in Alaska through the 70s and half of the 80s, which Alaska was the wild, wild west. Like, Anchorage was referred to as a Wild West city. Like, it was unruly. But living in it during it while it's happening, you probably don't see it, right? It's not till decades later when the statistics come out.
Yeah, I do feel, though, and in this episode, we kind of challenge that a little bit, because when the FBI agent sits down with Shirley and says,
I'm surprised you do remember what you do.
It's been a long time.
Actually, pretty impressive. Do you want to talk about Hansen? I was wondering if you were aware. Like, I wanted to show you a picture of him. This is the book that I picked up, and there was a man that was arrested for numerous homicides in Alaska. And somewhere along the way, I was told that your husband knew this person. His name is Robert Hansen. But the bottom picture, does he look familiar at all to you? Did he ever have anyone he went hunting with that had their own plane?
She flat out was like, I don't. She has nothing. And then immediately goes into, but I am aware of this thing that just happened in McCarthy.
But she was aware of it because she was working at the hospital where they got the one victim in.
So this is this is how I'm trying to connect the context clues that are going to challenge that, because even if she's oblivious of the news, even if she wasn't paying attention in her neighborhood, Eddie was working at a morgue, and at one moment she says, "Oh." In her journal, she writes, Eddie's working at the funeral home, and
he's learning to embalm.
He's learning embalming. He's doing this. So at some point, when they're eating their SpaghettiOs, Eddie, I'm sure this is also the episode where Eddie says, "I was working here," and I love all of the synchronicities and the coincidences where he's like, "That's when they started bringing in the bodies from this guy when he was spilling the beans." So I would really struggle to think that at some point Shirley didn't say, "Hey Eddie, how's work today?" And Eddie not saying, "Guess what? They got a bag of bones from this Robert Hansen guy, and we got to deconstruct." So I'm starting to think she's blocking it. I think
that would be my second guess. Either she's living in it and isn't seeing it, or she's blocking it. I don't think,
because you also got to remember this.
Yeah.
Only with what we know. And we're not saying she's complicit. We're not saying she's bad. Shirley had a stolen car in her garage. Who stole that car? This person that she was infatuated with. This person she was in love with and pretty dangerously loyal to. Now let's just imagine. We remove Ed and you put Skaggs, right? And you think, let's just make a fake scenario. We'll just a hypothetical scenario here where Skaggs comes in. He's like, "Hey, I'm going flying with my buddy. This is Bob." She's like, "Okay, Bob." I just wonder if, because she's able to rationalize so much, do you know what I mean? Like, when you think about
but Bob was arrested in 83. So if Skaggs and Hansen did know each other, and the question was asked a few times throughout interviews with Skaggs from different detectives, flat out asked him. In fact, it was even asked of him in 2011 when they went to interview him again right before he was getting out. Do you know Robert Hansen? Did you know Robert Hansen? And they would have only overlapped for a year, so maybe it's just, I don't know, maybe she just wasn't, I think I'm more likely to believe she wasn't naive, but I don't necessarily know if she was paying attention.
Yeah.
The same way she wasn't watching the news. Like, she was living her own life.
And and that's fair, because she also wasn't able to pick up on some of the cues from her kids.
Yeah.
Right? She was in a survival mode.
But should we talk about some similarities between Hansen and Skaggs?
Yeah.
So, back when I was doing a bunch of my research, I read the book, The Butcher Baker, and it was published in 1991. And that's what the movie Frozen Ground is based off of, which, by the way, the trailer, we should probably let everybody know that you made that trailer. Like, the trailer of Frozen Ground, when Eddie refers to, oh yeah, that he calls Robert Hansen the Frozen Ground guy.
Yeah.
You made that. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I had to be really careful, right? Pulling reference material for that. And they do have theatrical trailers, and they do have all of these different things. And so I had to pull different clips and create my own, summer blockbustery voice with the, in a world where, that. And so, yeah, we ended up making, that's like an 18-second version of kind of a fake trailer just to give hints of that movie. And it's so, again, I think I mentioned this earlier, where we got so lucky that Eddie and Shirley were right in the middle of all of these moments that are so known. And for me to, hearing Eddie say, hey, these bodies started coming in, that's so close to home. To hear Eddie talk about how he was in the funeral home when they were doing these autopsies from the Robert Hansen case. And then hearing Eddie give a firsthand account that's not just, oh, by the way, that was the state I lived in. No, now that we have this context of Eddie saying, these are the woods where I would steal cars and go abandon them. These are the woods that I rode my motorcycle through as a kid. Like, these are, right? These are girls that I went to school with. And he talks about the class rings and he's like, these are people that were, like, this was a part of my life and my community where this stuff happened, and I just happened to be there. And he's so casual about it. He says it like just all the other stuff that he talked about. So that was pretty wild. And I think that's
very Shirley too. Like Eddie is a lot like Shirley.
Yeah.
In the way he
very
talks.
matter of fact.
Yeah.
But see, that's the other thing though. Do we want to accept that she was that detached from such a monumental moment? And again, look, yeah, a lot of the patterns are there. So you have your similarities between.
Yeah, so these are some notes I took when I read the book, early on when I was doing my research. So these are some parallels between Skaggs and Hansen. And the reason why we mentioned Hansen in episode 4 is not only because Stephen Skaggs was asked if he knew him, and Shirley was asked the same question if she knew Robert Hansen in both their interviews with police, but there's also a lot of parallels. So the first big one is they were both hunters, which, I guess if you're living in Alaska, you're probably going to be a hunter. But they were both avid hunters, and they both killed, they were good. They both had, like, big trophies.
Trophy rooms. And...
They were both married. Both of them each had a son and a daughter. They were both referred to as upstanding citizens. Hansen owned a bakery and Skaggs was in the military. They both flew planes. They were both pilots. This is the big one. They lived 18 miles away from each other. So Hansen lived in Muldoon and Skaggs lived in Eagle River. They both carried guns, rope, handcuffs. They're both white males, active in their 30s. They both had self-esteem issues. Hansen had a stutter and was not attractive due to a bunch of acne scars, and Skaggs felt overweight. There's numerous times, where he's asked about actually, the military was about to kick him out for being overweight.
You know what I did think about a little bit, and hold your place there, but there is a story that I put in here where you look at the times now, right? And there's all this talk of body positive and all of these things. We're really sensitive and there is a story though where Shirley's talking about how nice he is. She's like, he's just a nice guy, right? And she talks about, we go to a party and we went to the military base and it was a Halloween party. But she innocently and playfully tells this story that she recounts it as this funny story. And she's like, there was a woman that said, I know these fat little hands.
That's Stephen Skaggs.
Yeah, and I thought was was he shamed regularly? And even if his, right, like if it was in a seemingly playful way, was it still a jab, and did that kind of continue to trigger him as it went on? And that's just a simple thought that I overall, when I hear Shirley talk, I think, oh, she's a sweet lady. But I wonder if he was regularly ostracized in a certain way, and it eventually got to him. But anyway, keep going with your...
Okay, and basically the last two I have on the list are the most prolific, but they both fit the 1980s FBI profile of serial killers, right? There was a big profile that was invented by the FBI out of...
John Douglas and Robert Ressler were instrumental in creating the foundation for modern criminal profiling in the 1980s. The FBI established the NCAVC to support criminal investigations through behavioral analysis. Douglas, Ressler, and others interviewed numerous serial killers to understand their motives and patterns, developing a new investigative tool. This research helped build the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, a database that allows investigators to match behavioral characteristics from unsolved cases to known offenders. Profiling techniques were applied to active cases, such as the Atlanta child murders, which led to the conviction of Wayne Williams, as well as helping to catch other serial killers like Joseph Paul Franklin and Nathaniel Code.
And so I got to tread lightly on this one a little bit, but Robert Hansen was arrested in 1983, and he died in prison in 2014, but he was linked to at least 17 homicides, mostly sex workers. But he was suspected of 21. And the only one of his victims that remains unidentified is a Jane Doe nicknamed Eklutna Annie.
Yeah.
I might have butchered that name.
Eklutna Annie.
Yeah. And Robert Hansen says that was his very first victim. So this is where the next parallel comes into play. So that victim was stabbed while laying face down with a buck knife with her clothes on. Skaggs also stabbed his victim on Mount Lemmon, laying face down with her clothes on with a knife. So you've got those parallels, right? And I think that's might have been, because I've asked myself this over and over and I've tried to figure it out. Why was the FBI looking into Skaggs?
Yeah.
And why were detectives asking Skaggs if he knew Robert Hansen? Were they that similar? Like the stab wounds, the style? And that's probably something we'll never know.
Well, and even deeper, that's hopefully not a stretch, but when you think about, did one of them cooperate one way or the other? When we talk about, did Hansen say some stuff?
Hansen swears it was only the 17. Hansen says there was somebody else active in the area. So there's that. So they know whether it was Skaggs or not, somebody else was also doing the same thing.
Yeah.
In Anchorage, the surrounding areas of Anchorage, Alaska. And Hansen's, all of those bodies, the 17 of them that he led detectives to, were all found within a 200-mile radius. So he would fly his plane. So there are a lot of similarities. But reading the book, I also found really interesting the parallels between Shirley and Robert Hansen's wife, Darla, which can be found in chapter 9 of The Butcher Baker. So both Shirley and Darla, not only are there parallels between Hansen and Skaggs, but there's parallels between the wives. So both were religious women and active in their church. Both stood by their husbands at the times of their arrests, relying on their faith. Neither one claimed to know that their husbands, what they were up to, nor did they ever think that they were capable of such crimes. So they were completely shocked, right? Darla was Hansen's second wife, and Shirley was Skaggs' second wife. Both were mothers, right? I mentioned that before. They each had a son and a daughter. They, too, talk about low self-esteem issues while growing up. Both of them thought they were too tall. So Darla thought the same thing. Shirley, you can hear it in episode 2, she talks about how the kids gave her the nickname Giraffe. And all the other boys were shorter than her, so nobody ever asked her out. Darla worked as a school teacher and Shirley worked as a secretary. Both were originally from the Midwest. So Darla was from Arkansas and Shirley from Ohio. So I thought that was really, so the FBI created a profile list, right, for serial killers in the 80s. But is there also a profile list for the for the spouses? Because they're also very similar.
Yeah. No, this is kind of a random tangent, but it's something that came up in episode 3 when Eddie was talking about a girl that he was teasing because she was awkwardly tall. Did you catch that?
Yeah.
Isn't that
I did, yeah.
But
so there's a lot in episode 4, right? We could go down so many rabbit holes. There's so much with just the Alaska part of it. And I think we did a great job of bringing Alaska in to the story, the crime of Alaska and how dangerous Alaska was, and trying to portray like Anchorage was part of the circuit of sex workers.
Yeah.
So it was really normal for girls, sex workers, to bounce from Honolulu to San Francisco to Seattle up to Anchorage. And the pimps would rotate them out. And it was really common for the girls to not get a chance to say goodbye. Girls were constantly coming and going. So I don't know what the statistics would be, but I'm sure more than half of them were never even reported missing.
Yeah.
So it makes you even wonder how many girls are missing in Seattle that weren't Hanson's victims, or missing in San Francisco, or missing in Honolulu. I don't even know if we have statistics for that. And like you said, this is before we've digitized records. And a lot of, even think about this. Not only were their friends not reporting them missing, but their families weren't either, because these were usually runaways.
Yeah.
You didn't end up in a sex worker circuit if you came from a family that's going to wonder where you're at.
Yeah. And I think that's why it's it's such a stark contrast, where going from this beginning of Shirley talking about this blissful place, and then we stop everything dead in its tracks with the news montage, and then again quickly rewind into, all right, let's now tell you about Shirley's dating life. And I think that tells you a lot without telling you a lot. Like, we've talked about this a little bit before in other bonus episodes, that Shirley's, again, says it in a lighthearted and casual way, like, oh, I dated a lot. But when you take a step back and you realize, who were these dudes that she was in contact with? And she says, oh, some of them were jerks. Again, that's such a wholesome, still, and not insulting way to describe some of these guys that were really unsavory. So that's the other thing that, to me, leads me to believe that she's really sanitizing the accounts, because she did have some really, really scary run-ins. And I think that's why she liked Charlie so much. So she talks about this one kid named Charlie. He was a bit younger than her. It's the guy she dated for 7 years. And it's the one she refers to as I think Charlie wanted to be more like one of my kids, than to ever date me. And she talked about how they never went to bed together. But I think Charlie was a safe zone for her. Yeah. And he was obviously homeless at the time, because she says he was sleeping in his car. So she let him rent out the back room of her house. So I wonder if during that 7-year time period, that might have been her taking a little break from some of these pipeline guys or military dudes, but also having the security of the presence of a guy in the house. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've often wondered about that. And Eddie he shared a couple funny stories of Charlie.
And her boyfriend gave her a crappy Ford Econoline van, old 60 something, with the engine in the middle and 3 on the tree. And it looked so horrible. He was like, oh, we'll paint it, with a brush, sky blue, with a brush. It's an art car. And is that house paint you're using? And so, yeah, I hated any kind of school function where your parents had to pick you up or drop you off. And I remember mortified because I had managed to make some cool friends, and everybody lived better than I did.
I do remember Eddie referring to Charlie as one of the good guys. And what Eddie didn't realize at the time, you know, he's looking at Charlie as a good guy, and Shirley's looking at Charlie as just this like safe guy to have around, right? But they're obviously, Shirley was harboring the whole, how did she say it? That he told her the year he got saved, he went to bed with
14 women.
Yeah, and she just couldn't get past that. But Charlie's also the one that led her to that
The
Pentecostal church where she was saved of her arthritis. So I think she saw Charlie as really, really safe. Here's this guy that goes to this Pentecostal church where she just had a miracle happen. Like, she says that she suffered from really bad arthritis. And that night at the church, or that day at the church, you know, when they did their altar call to be saved, she went up. And they asked, you know, is anybody here suffering from anything? And they prayed for Shirley's arthritis, and it went away. So like if something like that happened in my life, like I try and put myself in Shirley's shoes, and I'm like, okay, if I had like crazy pain somewhere and I went to a church, you know, I'd grown up in one religion and went to this brand new church that was a little bit different and was quote unquote healed, would I have become an evangelical Christian, like a born again Christian?
I think the one thing that's undisputed is it was a real moment for her. It was something that was an experience that was really monumental for her. And she friend-zoned Charlie pretty hard. But I mean,
Charlie's living in her house.
Yeah.
But she did talk about how she'd come home from work. So it sounds like Charlie didn't really have a job. She'd come home from work and he would just be hanging out with the kids, like playing video games. And that's probably why Eddie loved him so much. If you look at it from Eddie's perspective, yeah, my mom dated a lot of great guys that she never ended up with. And
no, but also he does make comments about he probably didn't come home and find Charlie on the couch with his arm around Shirley. So that different type of dynamic to him, because I think he was already associating, oh, mom dates them, he's going to keep her away from us. But yeah, so then we go, she meets Skaggs.
And let's just really, I think we did a good job, but let's just remind all of you that Shirley met Skaggs in the summer of 1982. I mean, Crane had been babysitting for him, and maybe they had some encounters, but they met and started dating in the summer of 1982. They were married. Like, Eddie's not far off when he says, what was it, 2-3 months? It was 5. They were married in November of 1982.
Yeah.
So that's a short time.
That's a Utah County wedding.
Yeah. That's a really short, like, you date, you get engaged, you plan a wedding, you have the wedding. That was very speedy.
Yeah. And look, don't forget, this is a moment now in Shirley's newly religious life. So you're gonna make an honest woman out of me, right? Like, this is an interesting thing. And I like how, you know, even Eddie saying, hey, wow, that was fast. But it wasn't, oh, well, that was not a good union. Do you know what I mean? Like, it wasn't, that's what I think is really interesting about all of it. Their whole marriage is, it was really good until it wasn't. Right? I did think it was very interesting in this episode where Shirley says, I don't remember a lot of things. I don't even remember where we went on our honeymoon. What? You're going to forget Hawaii?
To be fair.
Have you been to Hawaii?
Well, okay. They went to Hawaii twice. So let's just, they did go to Hawaii twice. They went to Hawaii on their honeymoon, and then they took the kids, all 4 kids, to Hawaii. What was it? A year or 2 later during the summer. So they went twice. So she probably, I'm assuming, after going through this really traumatic event, and she told me she threw away a bunch of photos. So while she was throwing away these photos, was she throwing away those memories too? Like, she probably, anytime she thought of Skaggs or a time they had together, it would probably force that memory out, right? After she got divorced from him and was trying to heal. She says that was a time in her life that she didn't want to remember. Which, think about how hard that was, too. Because it sounds like Alaska, after Ed died. Sorry, I shouldn't laugh. After Ed died, it sounds like from 1977, even during her marriage to Skaggs, because the trauma didn't happen until Arizona, was probably the happiest time in Shirley's life with her kids.
Sure.
Like, I'm not talking about the time she was married to my dad, but like when she looks back at her past, that's the time in her life that she's spending time with the kids and she has a great job. She finally has money. She doesn't need to rely on a man. And then she does meet this guy who's like great and they have things in common and he marries her. And so that's a really happy time. And so for her to go back and choose to not remember that time period of her life, that had to have been so hard.
But look, there's these clues that also lead you to believe that she was at peace with it, because you're talking about it. You're like, okay, so now, you're no longer, you're talking about Alaska with her. And you're like, so you're no longer with your first husband. And she just very casually interrupts and says, because he died.
Yeah. And he was dead. I think that was her.
And so that's why it's so interesting to me that, if you're going to block something out, block out all of this Arizona time, because that's when the nightmare began. But I thought it was so interesting. She's like, I don't even remember my honeymoon. And look.
Or maybe that was her way of telling me. Think about it too. Like, I'm sitting in a room with her interviewing her and I'm asking some pretty personal questions. Like, maybe that was her way of telling me, I don't want to talk about the honeymoon. I don't even remember where we went on our honeymoon. So don't dare ask me a question.
Or your dad's right there playing with the kids.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. That could be it too. Because a lot of these interviews happened on the phone. So she's at home with my dad. And so maybe he was in the room and she's like, well, I'm not going to talk about. Because she does have multiple journal entries of Hawaii. She accounts day by day of their honeymoon, like where they went and what they saw.
Journals or no journals, I've sat on the beach in Hawaii and watched the sun rise. You're never going to forget that.
Or maybe she merged it with the trip that she went to with the kids.
Sure. But I think episode 4 was so fun because we did get lucky with so many nuggets. There was so much stuff to put in. There was
so much, yeah. And we had Eddie. It shifted too from episode 3 being really dark, like Eddie's dark childhood, to now Eddie is now sharing
fun stories.
Like, this is the time I stole those tires, or this was the time we finally had money, or
but there is a fun reversal there, because episode 3 you want to just hug Eddie, right? And he's telling episode 4, you're like, Eddie, you little dirtbag.
Yeah.
Right?
But then we were watching Eddie grow too, right? Like, he's starting to get great jobs. Like, he got a job at the hospital and he's getting a job at the morgue. So he's like finding himself, making his way through the world. And we're like rooting for him to stop stealing cars.
It is Eddie growing up. And it is, again, us cheering him on as an anti-hero, because there's that really, really charming story where he's like, we were at the mortuary, and he's like, I'm straight, I got a job, but I would, we put our cars in the garage.
Yeah. Well, and he's letting us know too, like, yeah, I did my job. Like, I vacuumed the floor and I'm there to answer the phone.
And then, but it's so fun to still have him inject these little moments of, but we were at a funeral every weekend and we knew we were going to go cruise. And so we would take the flowers from the funerals and hand them to the girls. Right?
I think that was even a story. So I knew about that one. I grew up with that story, which, if you think about it, it's a little creepy, but really fun at the same time.
Yeah.
So I think I prompted Eddie on that when we were interviewing him. I think I prompted him to tell that story because I loved it so much.
But it is fun by association, right? It is this really, when you step back for a moment, I have this really neat image of when one of the conflicts started in Eastern Europe, and there's all these soldiers lined up, and there's this teenage kid giving a rose to a girl, and she's totally like blushing. And I love how Eddie paints that picture of, by the way, we were bringing in all these bodies and I was doing all of these really seemingly dark tasks, and yet when I punched the clock and we went cruising, we were able to still be kids.
Mm-hmm.
And we were still be able to have these. And he was taking... So think about so many things Eddie's processing all the time. Not to mention his criminal behavior, not to mention his home life, not to mention his run-ins with authority, but also he does reveal a lot about his concern for his classmates.
And even the one story he shared of his classmate there that one day that he showed up to work, and he's like, I just saw her 2 days ago, and he goes over, and when he says, and when you've seen one of your loved ones, in a casket, you'll know instantly what Eddie's referring to, and he says that the body just looks different, that the soul is gone, that the bodies don't look the same, and so he had to do it. He almost couldn't believe it at first because the body looked so different, and he goes to check her hand, and sure enough, their class ring.
1983 class ring.
So we have to be reminded of how small, what did we pull up? Anchorage was only 150,000 people, and they lived in a suburb. So he grew up, he knew everybody in Eagle River.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now he's working at the mortuary. So most of the people coming through are going to be people.
He's going to recognize them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I do think that speaks a little bit to the resilience of Eddie. How I don't imagine that any of these kids were going to counseling, right? Like Eddie's processing things.
This is the 1980s in Alaska.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Did they even have therapists there or counseling offices?
Obviously not.
I mean, I'm sure they did.
But so just seeing him navigate all of these scenarios in his life, and just one after the other, it leads us into... There is a moment, right, when I ask him, all right, in hindsight, like the Sixth Sense moment, did you see these things in Skaggs? And he does. But then he also shares the flying story with us in this episode. And
he shares the flying story. He refers to Skaggs as Mr. Skaggs, so he's showing respect to him. But then when you ask him that question, he immediately goes to, there was something off in the eyes.
Something with the eyes, which I thought was interesting. That's another topic. The eyes keep coming up, right? Like these deep, intense stare. And I think for me, sitting with him and hearing him say that, I was able to completely relate to what he was talking about because we've stared into those eyes, right? But I do really appreciate how genuine he was with the flying story. That story, which is perfectly corroborated by Skaggs himself.
Mm-hmm. Which that was so cool. Like to hear Eddie tell the story, and then we had sat down with Skaggs. Skaggs told the story.
Yeah.
And then a couple months later in April, we sit down with Eddie, and Eddie just paints the picture. And it's another one of those things like with Wolf Dog, where these timelines and people who haven't seen each other, spoken to each other in 40 plus years have the same accounts.
Well, and then Shirley says the same thing, right? In her journal entry, she paraphrases exactly.
Yeah, she goes, Corain kept asking for stalls and then got sick.
And then she got sick and was green, right?
Yeah, and Eddie talks about how Corain was green, and yeah.
Yeah, and then Skaggs talks about on the way home, flew really
smooth as butter.
Smooth as silk, or whatever. Yeah. So it's kind of fun. It's like when you read the Bible and there's like the different Gospels of Luke, John, and they're all talking about the same thing. And you're like, wow, these...
Okay, it's like we have a bunch of puzzle pieces, or you start this project, there's a bunch of puzzle pieces on the table, and you don't know if there's 5 puzzles, 3 puzzles, that you got to try and figure out. And as you're putting the pieces together, it's all one puzzle. Like all the pieces belong to the same puzzle.
And they all kind of fill in the gaps. I think that the flying story is probably the most comprehensive account that we have because of that. And Shirley
outside of Wolf Dog.
Sure.
With
yeah. When Shirley, talking about I was scared to fly. Well, now we know why, because Eddie's talking about, this thing's held together by a tensioner that looks like it came from Ace Hardware. And, Skaggs telling us, hey, I was doing these maneuvers to kind of...
Yeah, Eddie corroborates. He validates Skaggs. We sat with Skaggs, and it's like, was it just his ego telling us how good he was? Like he was boasting, right? And bragging about himself, about how amazing he was. And then to have Eddie a couple months later tell the story and validate Skaggs, but not in a boastful way, just to be like, dude, this guy was doing hammerhead stalls. And you just sit back and you're like, oh my God. Like everybody, that's the other thing too, is like everybody's telling true accounts. Yeah. Nobody's exaggerating.
Yeah. And so I think that was fun to witness and to collect.
And putting the pieces together of Shirley's journal entries of encounters with the police and Eddie, and then to hear Eddie tell his stories of like, no, that was the blazer I stole, and the other one was sitting out in the woods. And to see those two, to see Eddie's story parallel Shirley's journal entries.
Yeah. And it was also fun to hear the playful journal entries about all of his arrests and run-ins with the law, and Eddie to see he's already kind of reconciled all those things. We're on the backside of all of those stories. And then we go into her interview with, we had Ken from the Salty Horologist come and read with Shirley, and we had to piece together those questions and answers. Those files were really hard to work with because I had very limited things, but having Shirley answer Ken's questions as the FBI guy, and then it's also again another moment that we just happened to be lucky that she was there for some of those really famous incidents, and her talking about Eddie worked in the hospital, I worked in the hospital, Eddie worked in the morgue, and she also talks about all the classes that she took and the belly dancing and the painting. And
so let's talk about that just for a quick moment. So Alaska, it's not an easy place to live. And Skaggs talks about this. You either love it or you hate it. There's no in between, right? And what I mean by hard, it's basically dark. 4 months out of the year? Yeah. Shirley even talks about this. She says it only gets like a dusk around noon. And then in the summer, you have 3 months of daylight. And it's cold. And it's rugged. And it's wilderness. And so you have this. And you have a bunch of families, men bringing their families to Alaska to start, it's like the wild frontier. Like they're going out there and starting new lives. And so it was a hard place for women. And Shirley mentioned a couple times that a lot of the kids Eddie hung out with didn't have moms in the picture. A lot of the moms, or a lot of women in Alaska, especially during the 70s and 80s, couldn't stay very long. They left and went back down to the lower 48. So what Alaska did was Alaska offered free classes. Like they tried to get the community involved because suicide rates were really high as well. So they tried to get the community involved, and they offered all kinds. So that's what Shirley's referring to when she said there was all kinds of classes. Was the community centers were offering painting, belly dancing, creative, active classes for you to take. There were even classes where you could go do accounting. So I'm sure the community college was offering free classes too. So that's what Shirley's referring to when she says there were all these classes you could go take. And so Shirley took advantage of that and loved it, and you have to think she grew up really poor, didn't have access to a lot of that stuff, went to an all-girls Catholic high school. So I'm sure a lot of those classes were amazing. The first time she's ever been introduced to some of this stuff, and she's really creative. So now here she is in painting classes and ceramics and sculpting. And so Alaska was hard.
Yeah. No, Skaggs does talk about that. When we sat down with him, he's like, oh.
We'd go up there for the art, and they had, neat thing, they had these night school classes. Up there, anybody that knows how to do something and wouldn't mind teaching someone else, they sign them up.
Okay.
And so every school had classes and stuff at night, and they were like $1 to enter the classes.
She even took like a calligraphy class.
And so, and as I was going through like old newspapers, just all of these different archives of old newspapers, I did find a lot of classes. And it was neat. They had like basket weaving classes. They had all of these different, not only of the native peoples, right, but a lot of classes that I thought, oh, tennis. So I thought that was very interesting. And what a different time, right? Community and getting together, potlucks and things in the 70s and 80s, as opposed to now they probably just have Facebook groups where they all talk about bear sightings. And
I wonder if they still offer free classes. Alaska's, Shirley talks a lot too about are they called dividend checks? Like Alaska makes a lot of money from oil. And if you live in Alaska, she would talk about the checks that the kids got every year. Like every single person that lives in Alaska would get a check from the state. And I think they still do them. And I think she said they were over $1,000. And so that's what she would use to buy the kids, back when they were in elementary and middle school. She would get these catalogs and have the kids pick out their clothes from like JCPenney catalogs. And that's how she was able to buy them clothes.
On 12/20, their $1,000 check from the state arrived today. They were all excited.
Alaska still does it. So Alaska gives checks to residents annually through the Permanent Fund Dividend, the PFD, which is funded by the state's natural resource earnings. Eligible residents receive an amount that fluctuates each year. The dividend in 2024 was $1,000. And that's what it was in the 80s, too. Shirley talked about the checks being around $1,000. So if you think about it, you don't have a lot of money. You're this like single mom, and Alaska just gave you $3,000, Crane, Eddie, Shirley. That's how she got all their clothes.
Dude, what if Shirley was like, hey, there's 7 kids in my house right now?
We finally got into a decent house. And now, of course, my dad, ever the scam artist, was working under a fake name, claiming like 7 dependents. And and I remember when the IRS agent showed up on our door when I was like in probably 4th grade, 5th grade, and looking for Jim Edwards, and then my mom playing dumb, and then later calling them back, because she didn't want to get in trouble, and narking them out.
But that's really cool. So I remember that there was some stuff that stuck with her. So those checks, the free classes. So she loved Alaska. She thought Alaska was like one of the greatest places ever. South Africa and Alaska were her 2 favorite places she ever lived.
Dude, how many people can say that? Oh,
and not even like, okay, if we went to Alaska now and lived there, okay, not the same as living in 1970s Pipeline, Alaska.
All right, so let's change pace a little bit. Eddie does talk a little bit more about Skaggs. We talked to him about Skaggs. We talk about Arizona. We talk about some of his thoughts on that. And then he does show a level of sympathy for his mom. He says he goes to prison. You ask him, hey, did you ever go see him? And you're like, yes. And he's very respectful. And he's like, we were polite. We didn't pry. We didn't, we went along. We were all there to support my mom. And then Eddie says something. He's like, my poor mom.
And I felt sorry for my mom because now she's trying to float their life. They had this big house, an airplane, and the bills for all that, and trying to keep all that together.
She had to float them through all of this.
I remember that.
She has to keep up with all these bills. They had a house, they had a plane, they had toys. And then he says something that I haven't been able to let go. He says she sells the plane and then she sells the truck. And then she has to buy new tires for the truck because the police had stripped it when they were done using it for whatever investigation. The sad reality of that is I'm guessing that the assumption was their investigation was for Mount Lemmon, but they didn't realize that allowing that truck to A, get stripped, and B, get sold off was a real big loss for the Joan Archer case.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. In the Mount Lemmon transcripts, there's a motion that was made by Stephen and Shirley, and it's a motion order shortening time. And it was a motion put through on October 23rd, 1987. So Skaggs is arrested in 86. So it was about a year later. So they had the truck in evidence, in the lot for about a year. So on October 23rd, 1987, the judge signs this motion to release personal property back to Shirley. So she gets the truck back from the police. They never confiscated the airplane. She sold the airplane immediately. It sounds like the FBI, it was in a search warrant, so they went and searched it, and Ann Williams verifies that, right? But Shirley sells the airplane to pay for the lawyer. And then they file this motion, the truck's released back to Shirley. And I get why you can't let it go, because I'm like, if he's the prime suspect in the Joan Marie Archer case, that truck is evidence still.
That truck is everything.
That truck was, so the fact that the police, so maybe they stole the tires. I like to think of it this way. They probably took the tires off the truck and kept the tires as, did all the measurements, took all the pictures with the truck, and then removed the tires as evidence, because there were tire scenes, part of evidence at the crime scene for Joan Marie Archer. But isn't that mind-boggling? Like, I don't think that they would release a truck today if it was part of a ongoing cold case.
It just leaves you with so many questions. And yeah.
But that's another thing where, Eddie tells us this story and I'm like, no, they didn't. There's no way. And now, Shirley's passed away, so I can't verify with her. So I go back through, because that's a motion that did not stick out to me going through the evidence initially. Yeah. So I'm going back through the paperwork and all the transcripts, and I'm like, oh my gosh, here it is. Eddie's right. Yeah. They filed a motion and Shirley got the truck back.
And again, now in hindsight, you look at the motives and you're like, oh, well, Shirley's highly motivated. She feels an urgency to get the money for these things, to pay for these legal fees.
And she probably still owed the lawyer some money.
Sure.
Like, this is, he was sentenced in May of 87. So this is shortly. I'm sure the lawyer was, think about it. I'm sure the lawyer was like, oh, we could just file a motion for you to get the truck back and sell it. Then you could pay me the rest of this bill.
Yeah. We talk a little bit about that. And then Shirley, there's an interesting moment where Shirley's talking and she talks about Anne, right? She talks about her workplace. And she says, oh, they were like a family to me, right? They were so great. They went to court with me. They came to my home.
Which they did.
They were great friends. They were great friends. But when the way she's talking about it, you would think that they were these friends like
for years.
For years and years
yeah.
and years. So then when you sit down with Anne, and she's like, she had just moved here, and she'd worked with us for a short time, and I asked her if she had any friends, and she said that we were.
Yeah, so Shirley, friends. Anne said, and Anne has files of everything. She keeps everything. So when she tells us they hired Shirley in May of 1986, they hired Shirley in May of 1986. This woman had a folder of all of the original newspaper clippings of Mount Lemmon. Like, she keeps everything. So they hired Shirley in May of 1986, and then Skaggs is arrested in July of 86. So they only knew each other for a couple months. But like you said, those were probably like Shirley is being honest when she says they were like family to me.
Yeah. And you can hear kind of the accountability or the sense of responsibility that Anne in that statement starts to convey. Like, oh, she says that we were like, it's kind of implying like this sweet woman's got nobody here. We're going to step in. And then she says, we prayed with her. We visited her. We looked for resources.
So to Shirley, they're her closest, deepest friends.
She's like, we went to court. She says, we were advocating for her and for Skaggs. And we were going to our own law enforcement people to try and help. And then
yeah, because she mentions, we just thought Shirley had a really bad attorney. We couldn't understand why, the attorney wasn't getting Skaggs out on bail.
Yeah, and then she comes back, and then she does. She relates that moment that they're advised to step back. And then it was, then she gives you and she reads the letters, and it was very interesting to be able to go and visit with them after that interview and just have such a great, again, another one of those events that was brokered by this story. We got to go into their home and visit with them and share stories and have a great time, and I even got to play guitar. Like it was really
they were very, very sweet. And I immediately, like after leaving that meeting, could feel why Shirley felt like they were her. They were so welcoming with us.
Yeah.
I could see why Shirley felt like they were family.
Yeah.
And then to go through something like that. So Shirley's in a brand new state, no friends. Her family's in Ohio. All of her friends are in Alaska. And she's going through one of the hardest times in her life. And here's the, sweet Ann and Bert just step up to the plate and they, embrace her and they're there for her. And in a way, Shirley was really, really lucky to have them.
I think it's a step further than her being lucky. I think it speaks to the kind of employee that she was.
Yeah. And Ann did refer to Shirley as
a blessing to the
company. Yeah.
Right. And I think that also shows you a level of work ethic where Shirley was able to excel. And I mean, even to the point where they say, even when all of this stuff was happening, she was coming into work. The day that it happens, she calls them in the morning and says, hey, I have to go deal with this matter. And then she calls them again. Hey, this matter's taking longer than I thought. She's very transparent and very communicative, very open with them. And I think that's why they really stepped up for her, which was nice talking to them. And then also getting files and photos and things from them. So we'll be posting that.
Yeah, Ann took notes. She gave us copies of the notes she took in the courtroom sitting next to Shirley.
Yeah.
Of everything the judge was saying.
Yeah. And then the letters that she received that all verify the stories from episode 1. They all verify, when you do see in those letters that she gave us the conflict that Shirley had of, this is my husband. Should I stand by him? Does God want me to stand by him? And she even adds her own little personality when she's like, yikes.
Yeah.
She's like, so that was really, episode 4 takes you on a few thousand miles of.
I feel like it really takes you back in time. It takes you back to Mount Lemmon. Ann Williams brings you back to that year.
And makes the connection too, though, with Alaska. So it's a fun tie-in because
that was to hear Ann, like that was my thing, right? Like I found that newspaper clipping. Shirley always said the FBI was, going to extradite Skaggs back to Alaska, and they had that conversation with Shirley. So talking to Ann verified and solidified like Shirley's story.
It was good to hear some of those stories that really verified things that we were only wondering about. Maybe we'll do a Patreon and we'll post them there.
Yeah. Talking to Ann was really cool because we had Eddie and we did have Patty Wells. We did have Jamie. We had his mother Sharon. Like they were all there that day on Mount Lemmon, but they didn't know Shirley. And Eddie was in Alaska dealing with his probation. So he wasn't down for the chaos, right? So to actually find somebody that knew Shirley and went through the chaos with Shirley, I think that was really cool to connect that link.
Yeah. And also there is a moment where Anne says, in light of all of this new information that we got from our law enforcement friends, we didn't feel it was appropriate to share it with Shirley because she already had so much heaviness in her heart.
Yeah, so they almost became her protectors
yeah, they
in a way.
wanted to just be there for her. And they say that. We wanted to be there for her in this hour of turmoil. And so, yeah, there was a lot to unpack in 4. And it was also really tricky on how to do the sequence of events, right? How to jump from Alaska to dating to marrying Skaggs to all the way back to Eddie talking about Arizona and then ending with Anne. There is a charm about asking all of them how Shirley met Skaggs.
Mm-hmm.
We ask Eddie, we ask Shirley, we ask Skaggs himself. Clay talks about it. And everybody has that story of revolving around car repairs.
1127 prices are extremely high in Alaska. Pinto is in the shop.
Mm-hmm.
And the Pinto.
And that Pinto was a piece of junk to begin with, and it broke down.
I do find that also curious, right? You think about all of these guys were mechanics, except for your dad.
Yeah.
So Ed rebuilt an engine with one arm. Eddie is a very prolific mechanic. He's a motorhead.
Not even a mechanic. He can take parts from other cars, steal a car, take the parts. Yeah, I'd call Eddie a Frankensteiner.
But there's a lot of stories like that where Eddie has admiration for his dad, right? And it's him saying, I learned what a terrible helper I was because my dad said, I was useless when he was trying to do all these mechanical things. Then he talks about the guy that his mom dated that taught him how to fix cars and even gave him a car. And then you talk about, we find out later, we're excited to share Eddie and how he acquired tools and all these different things. But then you've got Shirley asking Skaggs to fix her car. Eddie could have probably fixed her car. Have you thought about that? And so Skaggs was mechanical.
And then I think Skaggs actually taught Eddie a lot because there's a few journal entries, and Skaggs talks about it too, of them working on cars together, on Eddie's car together.
There is that very tender story, that journal entry where they were working on the transmission. And
Wednesday, December 29th, 1982, high winds again for third day, had lunch with June. Eddie, Mike, and Steve worked on car. Engine came down, pinning Eddie's hand under it. Steve broke creeper, pushing engine off Eddie's hand. Dogs got loose and ran off.
Yeah.
Which I thought, holy smokes, right? What a interesting dynamic there. So, that's the correlation I wanted to make, that there's this common thread, this recurring theme of mechanics.
So wait, is the moral of the story not to marry a mechanic?
It is kind of funny that the punchline is where she has all of these unlucky relationships with mechanics and
cars.
Yeah, and then the one that she ends up really settling with for the last 20 years of her life is a self-proclaimed
I'm not a mechanic.
Non-mechanic. And on their first date, their car breaks down.
And my dad's car breaks down.
And he takes her to Mount Lemmon of all places. Right? So we go for full circle. So it's kind of a funny metaphor for all of these different, like her really turning over a new leaf. And I think that's kind of a fun detail.
Yeah. And then episode 4 ends a little bit differently. Like it's, I really love episode 4 because we start with your montage of all the news reports, and how dangerous Alaska. We allude to how dangerous Alaska is. We bring in like Robert Hansen, the serial killer. And then we even full circle back to like Mount Lemmon and Ann Williams and what was going on. But we end it with a letter that Shirley wrote to Anne, you know, letting her know that she was going to divorce Skaggs, and how she felt scared because which is interesting because like Skaggs is in prison, so Shirley was already living alone, but she refers to like being alone and how she was kind of scared. But then it ends with she's actually really excited to see what God has in store for her.
Well, yeah, because it's her deepest thoughts, and it's like a verbalized prayer.
It's Shirley ending the mechanic chapter of her life. No, coming to terms.
Yeah.
With an end, but being really excited.
Yeah, she's optimistic
for
yeah.
a new beginning.
And she's submitting her will to God.
It's a little scary to be on my own again, but at the same time, it was exciting to see what the Lord has planned for me.
Still to come.
Yeah. I guess so. Let's start with your full name and who you are.
Dan Skaggs. Shirley was my stepmother. She was married to my father, Stephen Skaggs.